Adopted, read by Kelly McGonigal. In 2005, I was 28 years old, living alone in San Francisco and looking for a new apartment. I'd finished graduate school the year before and was working as a freelance writer and editor while teaching yoga at studios around the Bay Area. During my hunt, I read a book by the artist Sark, in which she describes stumbling upon a sign in San Francisco in 1989 advertising a magic cottage for rent. As I visited one dismal apartment after another, each more depressing than the last, I lamented, where was my magic cottage? One day, desperate, I wandered the streets of San Francisco, looking at flyers stapled to telephone poles, hoping for a Sark-like miracle. That very evening, when I got home, I found a new post on Craigslist advertising, magical cottage for rent. I made an appointment and met the landlady the next day, bringing with me my checkbook and credit report. Behind the cottage was a private garden, complete with a 3-foot-tall, laughing Buddha statue. The statue was a bigger version of the very same Buddha I had kept in the small garden plot I had tended when I was a graduate student. The landlady assured me that the Buddha came with the apartment, despite not knowing which tenant had left it or how long it had been there. It was a sign, I thought. This was my magic cottage. As I signed the lease and wrote a check for the first and last month's rent, a small, short-haired black cat appeared outside the sliding glass door to the garden. The cat sat at the door and stared at us with yellow-green, slightly crossed eyes. "Who's that?" I asked, surprised and charmed. "Oh, don't worry about that stray cat," the landlady said. "I'm sure if you ignore it, it will go away." It didn't go away. As I discovered, my garden was the epicenter of a feral cat colony. The person who had lived in the cottage before me had fed the cats on a semi-regular basis. A neighbor who had indoor cats would also occasionally leave out a can of food for the feral cats. Although I had moved in with my own indoor rescue cat, I gladly stepped into the role of colony caregiver. I named the regular cats Shadow, Tinkerbell, Mouse Patrol, and Princess. But it was that very first cat I met at the cottage, the one who stared at me through the glass door with crossed eyes, who I fell in love with. I named him Itsy Bitsy. He was smaller than the other cats, skinny, but not starved. He was all black, except for a tuft of white fur over his heart. He was the spitting image of the cat in a framed photograph I had bought at IKEA a few months earlier. Later on, I would think there was something magical about that timing, that I had bought the photo, so I would recognize Itsy Bitsy when he appeared. Itsy Bitsy's left ear was clipped, evidence he had been trapped by a rescue organization, neutered, and returned outdoors because he was deemed too wild to be adopted. I should have taken that clipped ear as a sign that Itsy Bitsy would break my heart, but I fell hard. Within weeks of my moving in, Itsy Bitsy would knock at my kitchen window every morning and evening to be petted and fed. He liked to lie outside whatever window I was closest to, moving around the perimeter of the cottage as I moved about. When I went outside, he would run up to have his chin scratched or lie down to have his belly rubbed. He loved to play, and I could make him jump and dance by dragging a stick across the ground. He learned his new name quickly. All I had to do was step outside and call Itsy Bitsy, and he would come running from whatever hill or nearby yard he had been in. Soon he was waiting for me on the fence outside my front door when I came home after dark. My neighbor would sometimes feed him thinking he was hungry, but Itsy Bitsy would stay on the fence until I got home, even if he was fed. Of course, I wanted to turn this feral cat into a pet, but Itsy Bitsy was terrified of being in a closed space. Anytime I tried to bring him inside, he ran out. If I closed the door, he howled until he was free again. It was as if I were torturing him. Maybe some traumatic experience being trapped had imprinted this wild response in him. Even outdoors, he had his limits. Although he eagerly presented himself to be petted and rolled on the ground like he was in nirvana as I rubbed his belly. If I tried to pick him up, he became like a fish on a hook. He squirmed and flailed in that way that cats who refuse to be picked up do. until he exploded out of my arms and landed on his feet. 6 months into my stay at the cottage, rainy season came to San Francisco. That year, the jet stream carried storm after storm across the Pacific Ocean from Japan. When it rained, Itsy Bitsy refused to take shelter. Instead, he sat outside my kitchen window, getting drenched and looking in. I researched online how to make a weather shelter for outdoor cats. My boyfriend, a graduate student living in Seattle, helped me construct a tent out of a blue tarp. We put it outside the kitchen window, under a wooden staircase to the roof of the main house. I hoped Itsy Bitsy would take refuge in the tent, but he wasn't interested. Whenever it rained, Itsy Bitsy appeared outside my kitchen window, where there was no shelter whatsoever. I discovered that if I opened the window and sat on the kitchen floor, Itsy Bitsy would hop onto the ledge and let me dry him off with a warm towel. He would stay there as long as I did, but if I tried to close the window to keep out the rain, he would panic and bolt. If I left the kitchen floor to do anything else, he would go back into the pouring rain. I spent a lot of time that rainy season on my kitchen floor with the window open. Sometimes I would read a book and drink chai tea while Itsy Bitsy rested. Sometimes we just sat, and I would pet him, listening to the rain. One morning, Itsy Bitsy showed up at my kitchen window with a huge bleeding gash on the side of his head. I cleaned the wound as best I could. He didn't resist. The wound looked too large to have come from another cat's claws. Had Itsy Bitsy gotten into a scrap with a raccoon or a dog? Had he escaped a hawk or a coyote? According to the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, the average lifespan of a feral cat in San Francisco is only 5 years. I tried again and again to get Itsy Bitsy to come inside. I wanted to protect him from the rain, the predators, and all the other dangers of being a feral cat. I wanted to rescue him. I never was able to make Itsy Bitsy an indoor cat. When my lease expired, I moved back to Palo Alto. I'd accepted a full-time teaching position in the psychology department at Stanford University, and the commute to campus from my magical cottage involved 3 trains and a 20-minute walk on either end. Sometimes with train delays, it took 3 hours each way. I couldn't stay in the cottage, and I couldn't take Itsy Bitsy with me. Of course, I wanted to, but I knew the outdoors was his home. I arranged to have the woman who lived next door take over feeding Itsy Bitsy. We practiced before I moved. I made sure Itsy Bitsy knew where his food would be from now on. I left a bag of dry food with my neighbor and said a tearful goodbye. A year after I moved out, the woman who took over feeding Itsy Bitsy emailed me to let me know he was okay. I was so relieved. But she also wrote, "For quite a while, Itsy Bitsy sat out on the fence by your door waiting for you to come home at night." When I read those words, I cried. I was heartbroken. I took it as proof that I had abandoned Itsy Bitsy. The image of him waiting for me on the fence felt like evidence that I was the kind of person who let others down. For a long time, I grieved over my failure to rescue Itsy Bitsy. I'm almost embarrassed to admit how much shame I felt over not being able to turn him into an indoor cat. I carried it with me for years. As I was writing this essay, I talked with my husband about my guilt over not being able to protect Itsy Bitsy. He listened patiently, then said, I never really thought Itsy Bitsy needed protecting." He reminded me of the time a raccoon had snuck up behind Itsy Bitsy while he was eating from his bowl outside my kitchen window. Itsy Bitsy turned around, hissed once, and returned to his kibble. The raccoon retreated. By all outward appearances, Itsy Bitsy was the least vulnerable cat in the colony, not skittish and hypervigilant like Tinker Bell, not wary and always hiding in the bushes like Shadow. not slinking around corners, belly close to the ground like Princess. Itsy Bitsy was fearless, confident, healthy, and happy. Maybe Itsy Bitsy was protecting you, my husband mused. I scoffed at the suggestion when he made it. But later, as I thought more about that year in the cottage, his comment rattled around my brain. My whole life, I found it easier to offer compassion than to receive it. To be the one helping, not the one who needs help. It is hard for me to recognize when someone cares about me. In many aspects of my life, I have been like a feral cat wriggling out of an embrace. I remembered something Itsy Bitsy did after I'd been feeding him for a few weeks. In between meals, I left his food bowl outside the kitchen window alongside a bowl of fresh water. One morning, I woke up to find a dead mouse in the otherwise empty food bowl. At the time, I thought Itsy Bitsy was telling me I wasn't feeding him enough. I assumed the mouse was a friendly nudge to keep the bowl full. Later, when I got more involved in animal rescue, I learned that leaving dead rodents can be a form of caregiving. It's unlikely Itsy Bitsy was scolding me for not providing for him. He might have been worried I wasn't a strong enough hunter to feed myself. It's possible he was sharing his bounty to make sure I didn't go hungry. In researching this essay, I read an interview with a cat behaviorist who said that a fresh corpse is how a cat lets you know that you are family. In leaving me the mouse, Itsy Bitsy might have been saying, I'm adopting you. If the dead mouse was an act of caregiving, not a complaint, what other behaviors might I have misunderstood? When Itsy Bitsy waited up for me, sitting on the fence in the dark, was he waiting for dinner? Or did he want to make sure I got home safely? When he appeared on command anytime I called Itsy Bitsy, was he responding to the possibility of food or play? Or did he think I needed him? Why did Itsy Bitsy show up at my window every time it rained? I thought I was protecting Itsy Bitsy, but maybe Itsy Bitsy was checking on me. Maybe he didn't want to leave until the rain stopped because he was keeping me company. I know it's ridiculous to try to read the mind of a feral cat. I don't take any of these interpretations too seriously. But just considering them has broken open something inside of me. My mind reels, thinking that I might have been the recipient of a cat's caregiving instinct. That the universe sent me the cottage not because the colony needed a caregiver, but because I needed a cat colony. Now I look back at that year with wonder, how my magical cottage appeared like magic on Craigslist the very day I wished for it. How the tiny black cat from my framed IKEA photo appeared like destiny at the cottage door. How at a time I was living alone and struggling to find my place in the world, the universe gave me cats who needed to be fed every day. It was a purpose that filled some deep need in my soul. Never in my entire life have I felt as absolutely necessary as when I sat on the kitchen floor in the rain with Itsy Bitsy purring. In those moments, I could not doubt that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I always thought Itsy Bitsy needed me, but the truth is I needed Itsy Bitsy. 16 years ago, I could only see the year with Itsy Bitsy in one way. I had failed. I was an unworthy guardian. Now, I wonder, who was guarding whom? That purring is a guest appearance by my current rescue cat, Moo.